Bug Fables: The Everlasting Sapling is an indie game crowdfunded on Indiegogo and was developed by Moonsprout Games. It was marketed as a spiritual successor to the first two Paper Mario games, since as the series has gone on, Nintendo has removed or altered major features from the first two games, and it's something fans have been salty about for years. The one thing I've noticed, though, is that a lot of reviews for Bug Fables have been by Paper Mario fans for Paper Mario fans, and as someone who has zero nostalgia for the series, I wanted to see for myself if the game would hold up, and if there was something here for newcomers. Just for the record, I played the PC version, and I also used the hard mode medal, because I am a man. The art style of the game is the most obvious thing inspired by Paper Mario, but I think the world and character designs are all unique enough to stand on their own. It's a little rough around the edges, which I think gives it its own personality and charm and fits the aesthetic of a little bug world. And then there's the plot of Bug Fables, which is fairly simple. You meet your main characters and go through several quests to gather artifacts for the Queen, and fight bosses along the way. It's pretty basic as far as RPGs go, and I think that's fine. The story isn't setting out to do anything crazy, but if it makes you feel any better, there are lots of books to collect that tell you the lore and history of the world of Bug Fables, Bugaria. And while the story may be simple, the characters and dialogue is what really makes this game stand out. All three protagonists are incredibly charming in their own ways, and have distinct personalities and character arcs. They all have a specific purpose in combat and have their own abilities to use on the overworld that they unlock over the course of the game. Kabu is the first party member you see, and he's a noble and kind warrior who acts as the tank of the team. He's the one with the highest strength and defense at the start of the game, and his job is to flip over enemies with hard shells or spikes. Kabu is also the best character in the game, and best boy, don't at me. And then there's the second party member, Vi. She's outspoken and loves adventure, and more importantly, cash. She acts as the ranger of the group, and she uses her boomerang, which is a boomerang, but with a bee pun, to take out flying enemies. Leaf is the third and final party member you meet during the tutorial. He's a mysterious old moth who can somehow use ice magic. He is cool and straight-faced with a sarcastic personality. He's the mage of the party, and can use spells on enemies that burrow into the ground. There's a dedicated button to have your main characters talk amongst themselves about their surroundings, and they have unique dialogue for every single screen and character in the game, and everything they say is incredibly funny, cute, and heartfelt. And the friendship that forms over the course of the game is one of the main reasons I kept playing, because I couldn't get enough of them. All of the dialogue is written well, and the banter happens so naturally that it's impressive. It would have been so easy for a character like Vi to become grating and unlikable, but she's just as strong of a character as Kabu and Leaf, despite their stories being just a little bit darker. The side characters and enemies are also incredibly likable, even if some of them don't have much to say. The entire world of Bugaria is incredibly well thought out and realized. There is practically not a single character in this game that I didn't like, with the one exception being Kina. Not because of the writing, but because of her personality. They gave her the personality of like an anime tsundere, and it was just the worst. And I think that was intentional. If I was to criticize one part of the dialogue, it's that it was hard sometimes to keep track of who was speaking during some cutscenes that had a larger amount of characters in a single room. I noticed it happening more in the throne room, because characters would all gather on the left side of the screen, and none of the text bubbles had names on them, so if you missed their little movements, you would miss out on who was saying what, and some of the side comments made by other characters would disappear far too quickly. I think it would have helped to have names attached to text bubbles, or to at least have the text color-coded to a specific character. Since this is an RPG, let's talk about ranking up! When you rank up in Bug Fables, you have the choice to level up one of three stats: health points, which is health, team points, which is your magic, and medal points, which determine how many medals you can equip. Medals have a wide variety of different effects, and some can even give you special attacks. The max rank you can get is level 27, and I feel like this rank up system is limiting and severely outdated. Medal points are so crucial and necessary and more important than health or team points that there is genuinely no reason to choose any other rank up reward other than medal points. And because of the weirdly numbered low level cap, the amount of medal points are limited, so there will always be combinations that are impossible. Both the rank up system and the low level cap are things taken directly from Paper Mario, and I feel like this could have been a good place to do some changes. During the course of the game, there was a small handful of stat upgrades you could find. And I think it would have been better if medal points were rewarded automatically when you rank up, and health points and team points were upgrades that you could find in the overworld and as rewards for quests, alongside some attack and defense upgrades. I ended up hitting the max rank just at the end of Chapter 5, and every win screen after this is jarring. The game shows you that you gained 0 EXP in deafening silence. I know you guys love Paper Mario, but come on, just raise the level cap even a little bit. Speaking of medals, after talking to an NPC named Artis in the first area of the game, he will give you a medal that costs nothing to equip, and that is what activates hard mode. It obviously makes the game more difficult, but allows you to earn more EXP. If you use hard mode, when you defeat mini-bosses and each chapter's final boss, artists will reward you with a powerful medal. But don't worry, if you beat them on normal, you can still obtain these rewards, you'll just have to purchase them from the traveling caravan. So luckily, they're not something you can miss on your playthrough. The only missable reward for using hard mode are achievements for beating the final boss of each chapter. Only some of the optional bosses give you medals, so if you're finding one of them too difficult, it's okay to just set the difficulty back to normal. Despite using the hard mode medal, the game was relatively easy for me. The only things that seemed to change were that all enemies got more health and defense, while sometimes being able to take more turns and doing more damage with each attack. Your ability to defeat any enemy relies less on your level and instead focuses more on team positioning, your ability to time blocks correctly, what medals you have equipped, and having a full inventory of healing items. It doesn't matter what level you are, if given a chance, any normal enemy will take a massive chunk out of your meager health, and both the experience points and money you get from most encounters is so small that it is not worth the risk of fighting most enemies. Which is why, very early on in the game, you can buy a medal that will automatically kill all enemies weaker than you just so you can avoid them entirely. I had the Bug Me Not medal equipped for most of the game, and I would have to remove it when entering new areas because somehow I was always a high enough level to demolish everything. And when I would remove it to add new enemies to the bestiary, I found myself getting the shit kicked out of me by enemies the game is telling me are shit tier. If there's one thing about the game that I think will turn off newcomers, it's definitely that going through the game, your overall strength doesn't increase noticeably. You'll be in the final area of the game and be max level, and the enemies will still destroy you if you're not careful, and I found myself just running away from every common enemy at that point. Part of the problem with the overall damage being so low is that as you learn more special moves, they will cost a lot more team points to use, while only doing a little more damage than the moves you unlock earlier. Team points are shared between all three characters, and you don't unlock medals that restore team points until near the end of the game, so it's usually not worth it to use the more costly moves unless you have some restoring items on hand. Bug Fables is definitely one of those RPGs that makes you use strategy to defeat enemies and especially bosses, and I'm always caught off guard when an RPG allows you to inflict status conditions on bosses and actively encourages you to do so. The fact that you can stunlock most bosses with leaf special moves is nuts. It's also a coin toss if someone views that as a positive or a negative. The way that I like to play RPGs is to become godlike and punch enemies so hard that they cease to have ever existed. Tell me, is that so wrong? I spent pretty much the entire game doing 5 damage with Kabu while Vi and Leaf would hit an enemy and do like 0 to 2 damage up until the last boss. And then I decided to be a cheater and look up overpowered builds, and turned Vi into a whirlwind of destruction. A complaint that I do have is that it's not always clear which one of your teammates is being targeted by an enemy attack. I think the devs could have done something more like the Mario and Luigi RPG series, because I think that series did enemies telegraphing their attacks better than Paper Mario. I also found that I was able to block consistently with whoever I had in the back, while the front and middle party members would usually take full damage no matter how I tried to time blocks. I vaguely remember during the tutorial being told briefly that the person in back takes less damage and the person in front is a bit stronger, but I think that mechanic was glossed over pretty quickly, so it didn't set in properly. As I kept playing to around Chapter 3, I found that I was constantly out of money, and I was struggling to buy items and I couldn't afford the inns, so I ended up going back to the main town where there was a bank that I had invested in early on, but I had gained very little interest. I thought I was going to have to go out of my way to grind for money, but then I remembered that there was a quest you could redo in the main town, the only downside being that it was really slow and boring to do. I got tired of doing it pretty quickly, and instead I just made a profit out of making it selling food. I did that for a while and invested enough to get the bonus interest rate, and then I ran the game in the background as I did other things, and accrued interest until I could go through the game with a little worry. This likely wasn't its intended purpose, but whatever, exploits in video games are fun. During the course of the game, the main thing you'll be doing besides battling, or avoiding battling, is doing some light platforming and puzzle solving. Puzzles are overall fairly simple. You'll be using Vi's Beamerang to hit switches, and using Leaf and Kabu's abilities to push ice blocks around to get to higher areas. It's fairly rare that any puzzle has you using all three characters' abilities at once. Meanwhile, the platforming is serviceable, but I found it a bit of a pain in the ass at times, because of lack of depth perception, and the camera pulling back so far that I couldn't tell where I was going to land, and having to do platforming away from the camera to something directly behind the characters. I think I had the most problems crossing large gaps diagonally on thin bridges, especially since I was using the PC controls. It took me an embarrassingly long time to get used to the controls on PC. Arrow keys being movement, and the action commands being Z, X, and C. I swear I was still messing up Leaf's attacks up until the end of the game. The overworld controls in general can be a bit clunky, and Vi's Beamerang is one of the more finicky things to control. You have to be the right distance and position away to activate switches, and it's incredibly easy to hit walls and have to reposition when you hear that damn thwack sound. One of the game's biggest negatives is that cutscenes are unskippable. So if you have to restart from a checkpoint because you cannot defeat a boss, you're going to have to go through all of the dialogue again. You can hold the button down to speed it up, but it's still annoying. It will be the most noticeable and bothersome when you begin cooking, since you can only buy items one at a time and each chef will ask you to pick an ingredient out of your inventory, and then ask for the second ingredient. Then you have to watch a small cutscene of them making the food, and heaven help you if you need to make several at one time. Food and cooking is a big part of the game, and you have to cook to get better healing items. The good thing is that pretty much all the items in the game can be bought by a vendor, so there will never be a point where you have to grind for ingredients. The bad part is that inventory space is limited, and it maxes out to 15 slots at rank 19. I think I will personally always hate limited inventories, no matter what. I found filling out the recipe list a slog because the amount of walking back and forth between towns to buy ingredients and then walking all the way back to chefs to make them was absurd. One thing you will notice very early on is that your walking speed in this game is slow. You do not get a way to travel around faster, and you will be walking around a lot. You will especially notice this if you have the Bug Me Not medal equipped. Later on, you get an item that will allow you to teleport to an area with interconnected shortcuts, but it barely helps because you still need to walk everywhere within those areas. As for the music, there isn't much to say really. It's got a quaint homely feel, and it's charming, and it's easy to listen to. I guess the one thing I noticed is that the battle theme for Bug Fables sounds a lot like the battle theme for Mario and Luigi, and that's not a bad thing. It's very good. A couple of neat bonus things that happen is that there's an arcade that opens later in the game, and there's like a Flappy Bird clone and a dungeon crawler, and those are pretty fun. And there's also a simple card game that they made. That's all the enemies that you've cataloged in your bestiary, and there's an entire side tournament. And you get a little trophy if you win, and it's super cute and fun. So, after all of this, would I recommend Bug Fables?
Yes.
I had quite a few criticisms, but I think overall the good parts of the game vastly outweigh the negatives. The artwork is good and vibrant, the gameplay is simple and rewarding, and the characters and writing are great. A lot of the things that I critiqued about this game are quality of life improvements or streamlining. But the game being archaic doesn't mean that it's inaccessible or unplayable to a modern audience. I think for new players, I would recommend playing on normal difficulty and turning on hard mode at the first boss just to gauge if it's something they can handle. But I do think that this game deserves its success, and I hope that Moonsprout Games goes on to make more games and adds more quality of life improvements in the future.